Hi guys, and welcome to the Paletteful Packs YouTube channel. My name is Alice and I have the July 2020 Paletteful Premiere Pack here in front of me. I am so excited to see what's inside, so let's just go ahead and open it up. Okay, so we've got some green little paper squigglies here. And then the first thing that I see are these scratch board inks. That's exciting. Okay, so we're gonna get these scratch board clayboard inks. So these are by Ampersand, and you're gonna get 3 colors and then a black repair fluid. And the colors are ultramarine blue, carmine red, and yellow. So basically, these are formulated for adding color to scratchboard and clayboard. They're transparent and permanent, and they have vibrant colors, but they won't leave any residue over the black areas. So these are 1/2 ounce bottles, and the inks can also be used for any type of painting and drawing. So it looks like we're going to be using scratchboards today, which I have never tried. So I am both excited and intimidated right now. The next thing that I see in here are these scratch knives. So this is an Ampersand scratch knife set of 2, and these are just simple scratch knives for scratching your image onto the scratch board. I just said the word scratch a lot, but I think that's going to be a theme of this video. All right, down here we have an engraving tool set by Royal and Langnickel. This is a set of 4 scraping tools, and it's going to be designed for use with engraving art foil board and scratch board. So it has 4 different cutter shapes. The number 1 is used for thin detailed strokes. The number 2 is used to make medium to broad strokes. The number 3 is used to make broad to wide strokes, and the number 4 is used to make wide feather-like strokes. So we definitely have a lot of different variety here with the, that was probably not smart, I'm just stabbing myself. We have a lot of different variety here with all of the different mark making abilities that we're going to have. So I am very excited. Now underneath all this, we have the surfaces. So these are going to be the scratch boards. The first thing that we have is this 5x5 Ampersand scratch board. So it's black, and on the back it kind of has a little bit more of an explanation about it. So basically it's a clay coated hardboard panel, and then that's coated with India ink. So it's more durable and easier to scratch into than traditional paper scratch board, and you should be able to get cleaner and crisper details and lines. And you can also add colored inks to white areas and then scratch them again for additional highlights and volume. So there's definitely a lot of different kind of techniques that you can use here. It won't tear, crack, or bend like paper scratch boards, and it can be sealed to eliminate fingerprints for perfect presentation. So I am very excited to use this. This seems like a really unique surface. We also have another scratch board here, same as before, but this one is an 8x10. So you can kind of get used to what you're doing down on this one and move to this one once you kind of have a little bit more of an idea. Now, in addition to those scratch boards, we do also have a scratch board paper set. So this is by Scratch Art. So it's a economical clay coated board for any scratching using scratch pens, knives, blades. It's black, pre-inked, and ready to scratch, and there are 10 boards. So I feel like this is going to be great for kind of figuring out those techniques as well. Okay, so this is everything that you're going to get in this July 2020 premiere pack from Paletteful Packs. I am so excited, nervous, scared, I don't know, to try this. I've never done anything like this before, so we're gonna go on this journey together, and I will share with you what I learn on the way. So yeah, let's just go ahead and start scratching. I'm sorry. Okay, so as with all of the Paletteful videos, the first thing that I usually do is make some swatches. And in this case, that was more of trying out all of the different engraving tools to see all of the different marks that I could make, how thick the strokes were, how thin they were, whether they were going to be more tapered, whether I could make circles, hash marks, all of that fun stuff. I also went ahead and tried to add in some of the inks to see how those worked. And then I worked on a little sketch just to get the feel of how these worked before I moved on to working on the thicker board. So I sketched in a succulent really lightly with some pencil, and then I went in with the engraving tools. When you're using these engraving tools, you're basically scraping away the black and revealing the white underneath. So you're going to be adding in the highlight. So it's the same kind of concept as working on any kind of black paper where you're adding in the highlights, whether it's with pastel, whether it's with white pencil or white colored pencil, or in this case, whether you're literally taking away the black and adding in white by physically removing it with an engraving tool. So it's a little bit weird to wrap your head around at the beginning, but once I started thinking about it more as just like using a white pen or a white pastel, then it became a lot easier to kind of think of that negative effect where you're putting in the highlights. Obviously, you're also going to be using some similar techniques to graphite or pencil drawing when it comes to your mark making and your shading. So you can use hatching techniques. That's what I found to work kind of the best with this and feel the most intuitive. I suppose you could also probably use kind of like stipple techniques and things like that, but I mostly worked with hatching techniques. I find that hatching can be a little bit difficult for me. It's not something that comes as naturally to me as maybe some other people, but I really, really love the look it makes, especially when working with these. It creates a very engraved, almost woodcut look, and I think that's so, so beautiful. Then I had the chance to play around with the inks a little bit before I jumped into a little bit more of an intense piece. I mixed up this little green and used it to add in just a flat kind of green color, and then I went in with some yellows and kind of mixed that in to create more depth, and also added in some more yellows and kind of some blacks and reds to the background to create a little bit of a darker, more orangey yellow kind of background for the succulent to pop on. I just wanted to play around with a couple different colors of the inks, like try to use all of them. Once it was dry, I went back in and carved over the top to pull up more white, and then I was able to go back over that with more ink, and that's kind of one of the ways that you can create lots of different layers of shading. So once I was done with my test piece, I felt a lot better, way, way, way more ready to actually start working on something a little bit bigger. So I decided to work on the 5x5 scratch board, and I decided to continue in the sort of botanical theme of my little test succulent, and I decided to draw a rose. The woodcut-like effect that I felt like these were giving was really giving me these really cool, like botanical, almost tattoo vibes. So I decided to embrace it and go in with a rose. So I sketched it out really lightly again. I didn't worry too much about getting things really detailed, but I did need to know where stuff was. And I didn't want to put too much graphite down because I didn't want it to, show against the black if it didn't get carved away. But I didn't really have an issue with that in my first piece, so I wasn't as worried about it this time, and it wasn't a problem. So there you go. I felt pretty tentative when I was first starting because it felt very much permanent. Like once you take something away, you can't put it back. But that's literally why they gave us the black correction ink. It's actually really, really easy to just put it back on top and then it dries and you can carve back out again. And you can also carve out of the colors as you saw. I also found that it's really easy to actually have quite a light touch with these. If you want to go in with a really, really light small stroke, you can, and you can start that way and then you can slowly build up. That made me feel a lot more comfortable working with these. I just kind of started lighter and slowly built up and up and up and up until it looked to the brightness that I wanted it to be. I also worked in little parts, little sections. I just kind of went from petal to petal to petal so that I didn't get too overwhelmed. I don't know why, but for some reason, carving out the highlights from a complete piece of black seems way more intimidating to me than just drawing the silhouette and shading it. It feels like sculpting in a way, and I think it's a lot of fun, but it's also slightly intimidating. I used the edges of this blue to carve out the bright highlights where it hits the rim of the petal. And I really enjoyed using this blue engraver. This was the one that I used the most. I think this was the number 2, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. And I felt like this was one of the most versatile in terms of giving me a lot of different widths and things that I needed to do for just kind of like the entire piece. Like I felt like I kind of use it for the larger areas and the smaller areas, if that makes sense. So I mostly used that one as well as the really, really, really small fine red one. And this yellow one had a really interesting curved blade that made it really nice for carving out not just big areas, but areas that I wanted to have more of like a brush pressure type feel where it's like thin and then it gets thicker and then thin and thicker versus more of like just one thin line. I found that worked really well to create that kind of tapered effect. So I use that a little bit more on some of the leaves. So after that, I pretty much just continued to scratch my way around the scratch board using lots of different hash marks, trying to use like smaller strokes and like finer strokes and then, broader strokes for larger areas. Hatching is something that I am not, like I said, it's not something that I'm naturally necessarily skilled at. So I just kind of played it by ear and tried to build it up little by little as I went. And I am actually really, really happy with how it turned out. I was definitely a little bit nervous to use these, as I mentioned when I first unboxed them, but I loved them so much. They were so fun. Like the moment that I started playing around with them, I was like, okay, like this is kind of fun. And then when I sat down to really work on this, I had such a blast. It was so, so fun. There is something really, really satisfying about just like scraping away the black clay that's on top of the board. I really enjoy the almost three-dimensionality of it. Like you can see the actual like marks in the surface, and I think that's really, really cool. And I really enjoy this style because it reminds me so much of some of the old beautiful illustrations that I've seen in the past that are, etchings, engraving kind of thing, and I think it's such a beautiful aesthetic. It's very classic and you can do some really, really cool things with it. And I don't know, once I realized the freedom that I had, both with mark making and then with putting the color on top and then pulling it back off and then like putting it back on again and then pulling it back off again, I had a blast. And so when you guys are sitting down to work with this, one thing I would really encourage you to do is just try not to get stressed about it being like permanent, feeling like you're taking things away that you can't put back, because you can just paint the ink back on. And if you're nervous about it, I recommend starting with the board of the 10 sheets that they gave us. And there's a reason that they did that, so that you have a place that you can kind of practice first before you do your big board. So I think that's awesome. Definitely recommend starting on that. And now that I've been blabbing on about that, while we've been talking about that, I've started putting on the inks. So I put on some dark green ink for the background, and it was definitely too dark because it covered up most of the etching. So I just kind of let that dry while I worked on the front, and I decided to come back to that a little bit later because I could always lift it off and kind of re-etch that area. So that's what you can see me doing here. I think this is a really, really cool feature of this medium. It reminds me in a sense of watercolor, but in a very different way. The ability to go back in and carve out and scrape out highlights back on top was very, very fun and freeing. And I felt like I could really continue to add a lot of depth and detail, and I just really liked that. And I find it really satisfying. I think it's just really satisfying carving in that line and watching it like go bright white. There's something very therapeutic about it. So as I said, I wanted to add in some more highlights to the background, but I also went in and detailed some more highlights over the top of the leaves, specifically adding in some more veins, like where the light would hit the veins and things like that, so that when I added in the green, it would pick that out a little bit more. I was a little bit more judicious with the white when I went back over to carve out a second time. And that's because the first time that I carved out, I wasn't really sure how bright it was going to be, how much was going to show through once I put the ink on. And I didn't want it to be too bright. I didn't want it to be like too forward, because it was the background. It was still supposed to be dark. So the first time I was a little bit more conservative. And then the second time when I etched out, I knew that I could actually like darken it down if I wanted to. So I wasn't as scared. And I think that added some really nice contrast and made it just pop a lot more. And I'm really, really happy with that. Then I switched my attention back to the flower. Earlier, I had painted the flower in some kind of pinks and oranges, adding in a little bit of purple under where the shadows were, which added a lot more depth to that carving that I had done. But now I wanted to go in and add in this second layer of highlights. This layer of highlights I did want to colorize over the top. I wasn't going to leave them white, so I made them just a little bit thicker than the final highlights because I was going to do some white final highlights on the flower. And I also used it to pick out kind of some areas in the background that needed to be a little bit brighter as well. And then went back over that with some more of those peachy and pink tones. And that added even more depth to the piece. Went back over with some more purple to emphasize the shadows a little bit more. And then carved in some of those final white highlights on the flower in the center there. And that pretty much finished up the piece. But there was one last finishing touch that I wanted to do, and that was varnishing it. I decided to put a quick layer of glossy varnish on top because that was really going to bring out the depths of those blacks and just kind of like even out the sheen of everything. And it just made it look so rich and so beautiful, as you guys can see. I love it. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you found it helpful. I cannot wait to see what everyone does with all of their engraving scratchboard materials. This was so much fun. And if you'd like to get your own Paletteful pack, there is a link in the description box below. So thank you for watching. I hope you found it helpful and have a good day. Bye.